Hi, the following content is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. If you are a healthcare provider, please consult with your affiliated institution or local ethics committee for ethical guidance related to clinical practice.
Welcome to Module 13.
Hello. So we're talking about ethical issues in precision health research or precision medicine research. Last time we talked about one of the large issues that's gotten a lot of attention, which is concerns about justice in the creation of these databases. Now we're going to talk about a few other issues that are raised. Some of these are discussed in the readings, but I'm going to lay them out a little bit differently and cover a few things that are left out by the readings that we gave you. One of the reasons we're trying to do these videos is in a normal class, I might bring things in, and this is a way of, instead of having you read a whole literature on a topic, it's a way of summarizing some stuff that's out there in literature. So first thing I want to say, I'm going to talk at the end about informed consent in more detail, but I have to say one of the things that creation of large scale repositories, so this will be somewhat true about your Kaisers and your Gelsingers, which are pretty big outfits, but it's even more true for things like the UK Biobank and the US NIH All of Us research program, is that efforts to try and
David, I'm going to start. I just realized that my Module 13 notes are an extension of my Module 12 notes, which I don't want. So I'm going to open up a new Module 13.
Okay.
So 1 second, please. Sorry about that, everybody. New message, Module 13. And this is precision medicine issues.
Research.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Research issues.
Research.
Precision medicine research.
Good.
So there are issues in the research.
Yep.
So issues beyond justice. So one of the things that we realize when you're thinking about these large repositories is that a big part of this is recruitment of this huge populations that you're going to have to get into these things. And one of the things you realize when you look at these kinds of recruitment for this kind of minimal risk activity in particular, in spite of the fact that institutional review boards, or IRBs, or internationally they're called research ethics committees, in spite of the fact that IRBs spend most of their time looking at these consent forms in a lot of detail, by the time anybody clicks on the informed consent form, they've already decided whether they're going to be in the research or not, right? So you're not, if you don't want to do the research, you don't look at the informed consent form. The percentage of people who go to the trouble of looking at the informed consent form and don't sign is like 3 or 4%. So the big cut is before then, and that means all the real work substantively in the informed decision-making process, the informed consent process, as opposed to the informed consent forms, is really done prior to the signing of the informed consent form, or even looking at the informed consent form. And that really involves that recruitment material, where that's really where the engagement is happening. It's really all the engagement and everything that takes place prior to the consent that really does most of the work at educating people. But this is really interesting and challenging for a lot of reasons. One reason why it's challenging is that although IRBs do regulate and oversee recruitment efforts, formal recruitment efforts, in practice, there are educational activities which are not reviewed. There are just announcements and press releases that go out. And often, if you look at the web pages for, if you look at the Stanford Medicine Precision Health initiatives that we've got going on at Stanford, you'll see a mix of different things, some of which might count as recruitment activities and hence gotten IRB approval and review as the beginning of the informed consent process, and other things that really did not at all and might say all kinds of different things. And so the fact that all these different things are very, very blurry makes it really challenging, and it makes it really even more challenging when it comes to recruiting populations, because it's, if you have an article that refers to the activities you're doing and refers to patients in very commercial terms, UCSF, a former colleague of ours who's at UCSF, who's involved in the All of Us research program at UCSF, at one point in some public facing materials, he referred to the research participants as assets, which is not really warm and fuzzy language. And if
Whoa.
that's on the same page as your recruitment material, the people who are looking at that are not going to be able to distinguish between this is the part you should really count and this part doesn't count. They're just being told, oh, you guys are just assets. And similar things for other kinds of commercial language. And of course, the public may not appreciate at all the line between the regulated communication and the unregulated communication that will go on. Moreover, even in the regulated communication, I will just
Right,
say,
sorry, let me interrupt because I'm having a pen problem. I just want to make sure my pen is working. I'm going to give it a 10-second charge. I apologize. We've been doing a lot of videos and I think it got low. I hope everybody's enjoying this module 13. I hope you're all well. David, would you tell us why you have the Great Wall of China in the background? Did you already do that?
I did not. In November, we were in China and my wife took a picture of it. And I am very worried about the people of China becoming increasingly stigmatized by concerns about the virus. And so in this very small way, want to be supportive, especially given the Great Wall is a reminder because it's a very moving place, partly because of the incredible suffering of all the people who got conscripted to build these walls and who died and whose bones are entombed within the walls. So holding, even if there were failures of government, holding the people accountable is a huge mistake.
And the pen is back. So thank you. That was a little PSA from David. Please continue. I apologize for, you were saying that in some materials, participants were referred to as assets, and that definitely can be a barrier to recruitment and the establishment of trust.
Yeah, and so the line between regulated and unregulated recruitment material and engagement and communication is one challenge, but another challenge, which we're seeing more and more with these large efforts, is you can't recruit 1 million people. And realistically, to get 1 million people who are going to do everything, it means they need at least several million people, maybe 3 million, 5 million people who will each be partial participants to get 1 million full participants. You can't just use the kind of stuff that we typically do with research recruitments and have that work. So increasingly, there are companies that basically advertising firms that specialize in helping, whether it's healthcare systems do recruitment or research repositories do this kind of recruitment. And as that happens, the line between recruitment, which is a regulated activity, and marketing, which is something that theoretically should not be happening, has also gotten blurred. And I'll just be honest, we're seeing marketing. This is being turned over to marketing people who undoubtedly find it very frustrating. And it's understandable, the trade-offs. Let's be honest, if the tech industry and A/B testing, which is really a form of social science research, if people in the tech industry for all their A/B testing had to go through IRB approval for all their messaging, we'd all be playing Pong right now. So I can understand concerns about this slowing things down in some ways. But at the same time, we have to worry about people being misled in this realm or harmed in a way that we don't in other kinds of realms. A second set of issues, so that's the first set of issues around the recruitment side of things. A second set of issues is around the return of results. So when you're going to have a big repository, you're going to learn stuff about people. And even if you don't know who they are because you have an identifying code, but you don't know the individuals, that people at the repository do, and you could send that information back to the repository, who could then reach out to the individuals to convey those results. And some of the programs, like the All of Us research program, actually plan to return those results. If you look at biobanks around or research repositories, there's a lot of variation around their practices with regard to return of results, ranging from some places that say we're going to draw a sharp boundary between research and practice. And so absolutely nothing goes back to you. Thank you for your samples. Thank you for access to your data. You're never going to hear from us again. And it ranges from that to places that think of this as more of an ongoing engagement and partnership in which information is returned. That becomes even more important for projects like the All of Us project, where the hope is to continue to have people fill out surveys, continue to have new kinds of information, new devices and so wearables and so on that are going to be added to the databases. And so where they have to have people engaged and where therefore they feel like they have to return results. So which results should be returned? Only actionable results, whatever information people want to have, only information that's been clinically validated, so that you know the information is useful. And there's a lot of anxiety over exactly what should be returned and a lot of variation in practices around what should be returned.
Just to be very clear, we're talking sometimes about like a genome test that may find that you are at risk for a terrible, terrible neurodegenerative disease later in life. And for the ones who say thank you and goodbye, they will not tell those people that they learned this very important thing about their future. Whereas the engagement model, they might tell them. And the question is, how bad does it have to be? And what are the rules for when you tell them versus when you don't tell them?
That's exactly right. We once did a research ethics consult for a project where they had in a supposedly healthy population an Ehlers-Danlos type, I think it's a type 3, type 4, where they might not know that, and it would make a routine surgery highly risky for their anesthesiologist not to know that. But the terms of that, the consent that they signed said they would never be recontacted. So that kind of thing, and in fact, increasingly consents leave it open whether you're going to be recontacted. And if you are going to return results, as Russ said, how serious does it have to be? How well validated does it have to be? Because it could be a serious condition, or a mutation in something where you think this could be serious, but we just don't know because we haven't seen this mutation described in the literature, and it looks to us like it might be bad, but maybe it's benign. So there's a lot of unknowns, and trying to divide those lines. There are a lot of people who want everything and want all information returned. Tell me findings, variants of unknown significance. Tell me stuff where you're like, here's this thing and we don't know what it means, and there are people who want that information. Are they entitled to that information, or is it important that only information that really is clinically actionable and meets certain very strict criteria should be given back? And these are the kinds of debates that are happening right now for all of these large research repositories about it. In fact, literally, we are right now having there are ongoing discussions in the program, which will then come to us as an IRB about exactly where those lines should be drawn and what the right thing to do is in terms of the return of information.
You could imagine a breakout discussion of this, couldn't you, David?
I could imagine a breakout of this topic. That is a good point. I think that would be a good one. Okay, so that's a really challenging one, and lots of debates. And I'll just say, I'm at meetings sometimes where people feel very hot under their collar about this.
What approach is all of us taking so far?
So theirs is complicated a little bit by the fact that the FDA is putting some regulatory requirements to be able to return clinically actionable results from genome sequencing, but they're planning on, at least initially, returning both some key pharmacogenomics findings as well as the 59 ACMG results. These are the American College of Medical Genetics has 59 variants that they believe should be returned in the context of clinical genetic testing. So if you find them incidentally in a clinical context, these should be returned. They are silent about what to do in a research context like this, but they're going to start with the ACMG genes, which are all very high penetrance, combined with some pharmacogenomics. But they're also including some what are sometimes called recreational genomics. And they're doing genotyping first. And with the genotyping, they're going to be returning more of those sort of recreational results. So ancestry testing, ancestry results, just some fun things,
Whether you're going to be bald or your hair pattern.
Or cilantro tastes good to you or not, things like that.
Like cilantro.
And they have some very nice educational pieces that go along with those as part of the program. But the debates about exactly where to draw that cut, I know there's some people who think the 59 are not the right cut because they require that they be high penetrance. But there are genes where there's maybe lower penetrance, but high value in knowing that and very little harm in knowing that. So those might be things that ought to be included. And even though there's those American College of Medical Genetics guidelines, if you actually look at clinical genetic testing around the country, very few places that actually offer clinical genetic testing restrict themselves to those 59, and they vary in terms of what they return. Some places return 70, some 80, some 100. There's variation in terms of where they draw the line about what should be returned and which shouldn't. But at the same time, I will also tell you there's a group that's pushed really hard and said, this is crazy. You guys shouldn't be returning any of these things. These are research findings, and there are CLIA complications, although all the testing is being done in CLIA labs. Those are regulations governing the laboratories and whether or not those meet essentially clinical grade for the return of information. So those are all issues in the return of results and figuring out the right place to draw the line. Another set of issues are around privacy. So who's going to decide who has access to the information? What researchers are going to have access to what tiers of information? Given the fact that it's very hard to completely de-identify data, and we're going to be talking about that in a future class, that becomes really important. Obviously, there's concerns about data security and whether the data can really be made secure. How much protection, if this information does leak out, how much protection is there? One thing that's really important that took a long time to get passed is something called GINA. And so GINA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, which protects people from occupational or health insurance discrimination based on genetic findings. So that's a really important thing. But of note, GINA does not prevent discrimination for life insurance or disability insurance. And B, even though officially you can't have occupational discrimination on the basis of genetic traits, it can sometimes be very hard to determine and confirm that that's really what's going on. Another concern is law enforcement access. We all saw that a private database from, I can't remember whether it was Ancestry.com, it wasn't 23andMe.
Oh, it was a funny one that's not as famous, whose initials I'm forgetting. I apologize.
Yeah.
It was the Golden Gate Killer case.
Yeah, the Golden Gate Killer case. Basically, they accessed some of the data that was in some of these commercial databases that are fairly similar and have their own research. That's another set of research repositories, because even though they're officially signing up as a service to people, almost everybody also at the same time signs up to be research participants. And so that's another set of research repositories that exists. One thing that's really important and different is that if it's a private research repository like 23andMe or the repository at Ancestry.com, they are not covered. They have much different regulatory requirements. They're not covered under the common rule. They're not covered entities, and so there's no HIPAA protections. So the privacy protections are really just what they say they're going to do and what they decide to live up to. And tort law is the only protection. And of course, all the information that they've got is potentially discoverable. In contrast, an NIH-funded study like the Precision Medicine Initiative, All of Us Research Program, they have something called a certificate of confidentiality. And so short of Homeland Security under conditions of national security, anything short of that, like police trying to catch a killer, they cannot get access to do forensic analysis of any of the data in those NIH-funded databases. And now there's a new rule as part of the 21st Century Cures Act that all NIH-funded data all has a certificate of confidentiality offering that protection for people. And then I want to end with one last set of considerations and go back to what we started with on this video, which is consent. I want to just highlight again that because future uses can't always be anticipated at the time, right? What can we say? What are we going to do with All of Us research program when we collect it? What's that data going to be used for? Who knows? We hope lots of cool stuff, but it's hard to anticipate. So the result of that is that any consent that's obtained has to be incredibly broad, and just basically say it's for a research repository for researchers to do stuff. You can't give detailed consent for each possible use, because that would just be impracticable and make it impossible for the research repository to have any value. And another worry that we had about consent is whether or not participants would understand that they're consenting to be in research and a research repository. They're not signing up to get better care by getting precision medicine care or precision health care, that it's a research activity. So those are all concerns that I think a lot of people have about this kind of research. That being said, there are opportunities in a lot of the technologies that are being developed to make consent a lot better. And there's a group called Sage Bionetworks that's, oops, is that you or me?
That's me. Opportunity for
So
technology.
So there's a lot of work going on. Sage Bionetworks, who is also doing this for the All of Us research program. Here at Stanford, we've done some similar kinds of things. But really being able to utilize the fact that you can have online resources and interactive material, handing somebody a 10-page or an 8-page consent form with really boring language that's vetted by lawyers is not a very good way of facilitating understanding. Having something that's engaging, maybe it has some cartoons, has some different ways of conveying information in 2 different formats, both reading and listening, having some quizzes to make sure that there's understanding as you go. All of those are possible with a more technologically oriented approach to consent. And I have to tell you that the results of the All of Us program in doing that, which is mostly being done by Sage Bionetworks, makes me green with envy, because we've done studies of informed consent. We've done some randomized trials with different kinds of videos and different approaches. None of our efforts ever got anywhere close to as good or as successful as this program is at levels of understanding. We're in the mid to high 90 percentile. People really do understand this is a research activity. The consent is not required. It won't impact their healthcare in any way, and all of the other major things that we would be of concern. What we don't know yet is when it comes to the genetics and genomics, we don't have any of that quiz data yet, and so it'll be interesting to see as they roll that out and continue to gather quiz data whether they're going to be able to maintain the high levels of understanding of participants that they've been able to obtain up until now. That's it for quiz for module number 13.
That's a wrap. We'll see you at the next one. Thank you, and we're ending the recording.